You are listening to the new man beyond the macho jerk and the new age wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
Do you ever get hijacked by anger or fear? Of course you do. Do you feel guilty when you try to make time for something other than work or family? And what exactly is mindfulness, and how can meditation help us become more emotionally resilient? Jaimal Yogis has written quite a few books on mindfulness, meditation, and how it all relates to our emotional world. He's got a new kids book called Mop Rides the Waves of Life, but the lessons within are something we could all benefit from. Today, he and I talk about fatherhood, plus how meditation impacts the way we experience fear and anger. This, Mop Rides the Waves of Life. I love getting a copy of this in the mail, and I left it out for my daughter. And then, about 5 minutes later, she was over there sniffing at it and reading through it. If I say, hey, read this, you won't do it. But if I just leave things out, she'll go and do it.
I know the rebellion starts so early. I feel like our 4-year-old is already that way. He's like, That's what you do. That's what you do, Dad. I don't do that. Well, I thought this started at 16, not 4.
Oh, yeah. Well, so what had you write this book? Because the other books, Saltwater Buddha, The Fear Project, All Our Waves Are Water, there's been this thread of mindfulness, meditation. Those topics have all been in the fabric of the stuff that you've written before. So here comes this book, obviously for younger people. What was going on for you? Why did you write this one?
It's funny. I mean, it arose organically. One of the things I love to do is doodle. It's like ever since I was a little kid, I love drawing waves and love making little like big-headed caricatures. And so I was doodling this guy with really curly hair who had a little surfboard, and I loved the way he looked. And so I started putting him in different little adventures, little surf, dreamy waves. And then, something about him was just really compelling. So I kept like a narrative built. And then, lo and behold, there were 40 pages. And I realized, I think, that I could summarize these fairly complex or ideas that I was making complex sometimes in my books, or integrating into a more complex story, really simple. And I just submitted it. I was like, oh, that was unexpected. You just wrote a kid's book. Thinking back on it, when our first son was born, Kaivis, 8 years ago, I really felt like part of me just died. Because like I had set up my life to be really carefree. Like I could ship off to Bali for 3 months every year, live in a hammock. I could, if I got too stressed, I always had all these things that I could do to fall back, go play guitar on a cliff for 3 hours, whatever. It's like all of a sudden I had no time, you know how it is. Right. And so I was like, oh, I don't know who I am anymore. Like, I don't know. I'm totally in love with this kid, but that old me has just died. And so it's this funny experience of like, you're grieving the loss of that you've died. And you're totally in love with this new being, and you're like feeling all these kind of new superpowers from that, but you're really looking for yourself. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying like, I feel like this guy Mop was, now that I'm looking back on it, maybe came up unconsciously. He's like a reincarnation of the old me, like coming back into dad life. like he can do all the things that I wanted to do as a young kid. And that and it's not like I don't still do those things. I still get to surf and, more than I should as a dad. So I can't complain, but this character wanted to come back in to my life and integrate with like my life as a dad. So maybe that's how it happened.
Well, I appreciate that because there is that thing where as we become fathers, it's like a bomb going off. I reconnected with an old friend recently. I hadn't talked to him since before my daughter was born, or maybe, around that time. And we were talking about things and I was like, yeah, that just part of the slate just got wiped clean there for a while. It was full for me, learning how to be a dad, learning how to, be with this young person, like just being completely inundated with that. But then there were these pieces of myself and my identity that just got annihilated, for lack of a better term. And it just, or at least definitely got put on pause. And now there's an opportunity to reintegrate them back into our lives again. But for some guys, that's a place where we can tend to lose ourselves, because it's like, well, if it's not going to go towards work, bringing in money, if it's not going to go towards anything that has to do with my family, then a lot of them, they just cut that off. They deny access to those things that might be outside of work and outside of family. And I find that that's where we start to really lose ourselves, and we lose what's fun. We lose what's invigorating. I think this is where the grumpy dad kind of comes from, and he's kind of pissy and grouchy a lot because he's not doing anything outside of that unit that brings energy into the dynamic. So does that resonate for you at all?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you got to make time for play, and play with your kids, but also like play by yourself. Whatever that was for you. Like being in your band with your friends, or going surfing, or exercise. I know when I'm just getting overly grouchy with my kids, like I just have to take space. And sometimes I feel bad asking for it. It's like there's that guilt complex of like, no, yeah. I should be able to take it. If I'm not working, I'm not providing, then I should be like, working on the house, or like,
right.
And so you feel like you can, that voice of, maybe it's like, I come from a long line of military men who were like tough guys, I think there's a part of me that always hears that voice of like, don't wuss out, but right. Then if I go and take the run, I go meditate, I go surf, then I come back and I'm like, hey guys, I'm fun. I don't know how it is for you, but how I react to like what my kids are doing, like if they're biting each other on the floor over a popsicle, has way more to do with how I'm feeling than with what they're doing. Because like that situation literally has happened 20 times, and I've like screamed at the top of my lungs and been like, you guys don't have any respect for us, you never listen. What? And then I've also been like, whoa, okay guys, take a time out, separate, what's going on here, when I feel good. And then that situation is so much better. But I wish I could do that without, refilling my tank. But I think in some ways it's good that you have to keep that part of yourself going, because otherwise you just become a grump.
I think so many guys are like, once I get everything taken care of, then I'll give myself permission to go do what feels like play or feels rejuvenating for me. So once all the dishes are done, or once my bank account looks right, or once fill in the blank, right? There's always something that we're seeking, some kind of a completion. And so we just live in this constant state of deprivation. And until we get that thing completed, then we're not okay. We're not okay to go do this thing, because why would we be? We still got so many things to do. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and I think this is what's true for me too, is like when I take care of myself, I bring a much better version of myself to whatever I'm doing. I'm more resourced. I got a sense of humor. I don't fly off the handle. I don't wound my kid with my tone of voice or whatever that might be. It's just way better all the way around. And so I think we want to challenge that idea that once XYZ is completely taken care of, then I'll finally have permission to go do the thing that rejuvenates me or energizes me. I just see way too many guys doing that martyrdom thing that you talk about, that deprivation.
Yeah, I agree. And, so I slip into that myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we have to it's a funny paradox where you have to strive to improve your life and work on your bank account and try to make a positive imprint on the world. And it's like all of us want to make our lives as good as they can be. And also, it's like we look out at the world we're raising our kids into. It's like, I want to go, solve climate change tomorrow, but I can't do that alone. And you can't, all I can do is those little things day by day, like try to make my contribution. And I think I like what you said about we're always working toward completion, but that completion can never really happen. I mean, you can finish a task, but there's always going to be more to do. So at some point you have to sort of embrace the way things are now, because happiness can only come right now. I have to remember that again and again, that it's like, I can only be happy by accepting the fact that things are incomplete. The house will always be a little bit messy. Like, I'll always have some work on the horizon. It's never gonna, even if I, strike it rich, there's gonna be a bunch of things that have to happen now that I'm rich.
Yeah.
Holding that paradox, I've found, is really important, where you're like, okay, I got to do the work, but I can also just be like, things are good now.
Mm-hmm.
And if I really open up to gratitude, like noticing a few things that I have now that I'm super grateful for, and kind of breathing those in and being like, hey, I have work to do, but how about celebrating what I have today? Yeah. That's important for me.
I love that you touch on the gratitude thing, because I think there's that part of us. It's like, I'll only feel complete, or I'll only feel okay once this is all done. Then I'll be grateful. There's an aspect of this which is tension, right? There's a tension to having things being undone, and it's like, it helps me understand why completion feels so important. It's like, well, once this is done, I can finally be free. I can finally be relieved of this tension of when I wake up in the morning, and then there's something goes, oh, I got this thing I got to do, and oh, I got this other thing I got to do. And when you go to bed at night, you're like, I didn't quite get all that stuff done. There's that chronic sense of tension. It's a dynamic tension of like, hey, I'm moving towards something of improvement. It could be all good things, but nonetheless, you're not there. And I know a lot of guys, especially guys that are into this personal growth or building their business or whatever, there's that finish line's always moving and always expanding and always getting further out. So they're always experiencing this tension. And I think deep down, there's a part of them that believes that I'm actually going to get it all done. I'm going to be done. And then I'll be able to feel this sense of okayness and this sense of relief. But what you're saying is, let's just recognize that there's always going to be this tension. There's always going to be things to improve. There's always going to be things that need to be done. Now, what are we grateful for right now? Given that this is how things are, what can I be grateful for right now? And then how can I also enjoy what's happening right now? What if it was okay to experience a little bit of that tension without needing to get so wrapped up in having to have things done in order to be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. You're triggering a memory of, you may hear my kids screaming a little bit in the background.
I wonder which version are we going to see, the screaming version of you? Or?
I hear my wife is cleaning up the mess there. Yeah, I remember talking with a good friend of mine who I grew up with, Chris Sullivan. He's a star on the show This Is Us. He just was like nominated for Best Actor and for getting an Emmy. It's like super successful guy, right? Like he was on, he's been on all these Broadway shows, and he went through this huge shift where he was getting all this success and attention and fame, and all his dreams were coming true, but he was living in this state of panic where it was like, what's the next thing? How big is it going to get? Like, I haven't locked in the next show. He started a mindfulness practice, and I saw him like a year later, and he was just a completely different person. And he said, the thing that I keep reminding myself is like, I have to celebrate what I've achieved. It's interesting when you see somebody like that who is living the thing that so many actors dream. And he was miserable until he made that shift of like, I can celebrate this now. I can relax. Like, if I don't relax now and celebrate, I won't when I've won the Emmy or the Oscar, or I'm doing, it's like, he's doing even more in his career. I think from that new perspective, I think oftentimes that appreciation, it allows things to flow into your life a little bit more. But whether it does or not, it's like the only time you can choose to enjoy your life is now. So we have in the US like this Protestant work ethic where it's like your self-worth is like how hard you're grinding,
How you doing? I'm busy. I'm busy. That's we're rewarded for that. Right.
And there is an aspect of that to embrace, like working hard is a great value, going after something, believing, having faith in it. But yeah, there's a subtle mental shift where it's like you can let the appreciation and gratitude and love and passion be fueling you, or you can let it be fear
Right.
of like, is it enough? Is it enough? Is it enough? And if you're in that mind is never satisfied. It will never have enough. And so it's either one or the other that's fueling you. So I look at it really as like, what are you putting in your gas tank?
And it seems like that fear part is like, well, I can't even appreciate what I've got, or else I'm going to somehow let off the gas and all of this is going to come falling down. It's going to come crashing down if I take time to appreciate it. I know some guys are like, I'll lose my edge if I'm grateful, if I'm content. It's like, it's this weird, like I got to be miserable or else it's all going to fall to shit. Like this is crazy world that we live in. And it's like, well, that's when you believe your fear. That's when you believe that aspect of yourself. So let's come back to this word that you mentioned, mindfulness. How do you describe mindfulness to people that aren't really familiar with that term?
It's really just awareness. Mindfulness, the way it was taught traditionally is there was, you start with mindfulness of breathing. So you learn that, and that's just a way to anchor your mind. But then it was like, well, you go to mindfulness of thinking, mindfulness of emotion, mindfulness of sensation, then mindfulness of consciousness, like, which really gets into this philosophical place of like, what are you? Like, what makes you you? So mindfulness is this full package that was used as a tool for enlightenment for traditional Buddhists and yogis. But it's really neat that now we have all this science showing that, like, well, the simple breathing tool can really help you manage emotion, have a much more positive outlook, grow empathy. But then you can take these other aspects of like awareness of thought, emotion, feeling, sensation, consciousness to like a whole other level of really like philosophical reflection. So, but yeah, at its core, mindfulness is just awareness. And there's this great story, I think this one about the second arrow. This is a traditional Buddhist teaching where the Buddha was saying, hey, monks, you guys have been doing this for 10, 15 years, and you may notice you still feel some pain and discomfort. So what's the difference between you and somebody who isn't practicing mindfulness? And he said, well, let me tell you the difference. A run-of-the-mill person, when they're hit with an arrow, feels the pain of that arrow, and then the traditional text says they beat their breast and lament and wail and complain, and maybe they get into some story of, why do arrows always hit me? I'm always like the victim, or whatever their story is. And he says, but the person practicing mindfulness who's really gotten the knack of it, they just feel the pain of one arrow. And they're like, I'm done. I feel the pain of that arrow.
Yeah.
No story. And when you look at people who have been meditating for like practicing Zen for a long time, when they are hooked up to an fMRI and they're in the moment watching their minds, there's a sound. You see a sharp spike where they are aware of the sound. But as soon as the sound is done, their mind is back to baseline. So they have this sort of ninja quality of like they're with it right there in the present. They're with the stimulus, but then they're not like, oh, hey, where's that sound coming from? I wonder if I should get up. Oh, I was going to cook some rice.
I need to go yell at whoever made that sound. Or
right.
Why does the sound always have to happen when I'm meditating?
Exactly. So yeah, that's mindfulness at a high level.
It seems, for me, the way I describe it, I've been meditating almost 20 years, is when I'm in a state of mindfulness, I'm watching the TV show that is Tripp Lanier.
Right.
And so the phenomena that is Tripp Lanier, I just watch it happen. Where I think some people, when they think about being mindful, it's like they're trying to control everything that's happening. I shouldn't feel this way, and I shouldn't say this thing, and I shouldn't. And it's really just more of an awareness or a watching or a witnessing of those things. And even my desire when I say, oh, I shouldn't do that, and I can watch that other arrow come in and start to do its thing. Like, yeah, you're such an idiot for doing that thing. It's like, this is the TV show. This is what comes on at 5:00 every day. And these are the characters. And it helps me to just zoom out and be like, yeah, this is the TV show. This is what shows up in my mind. And all of these different characters, that there's the arrow and then the other arrows that pile on. And this is just how it goes. And it helps me to not to dissociate from myself, not to, to act like I don't have a body and I don't have emotions and that kind of thing, but just to not get wrapped up in it and not to have those echoes, like you said, that when the sound happens, to then not have it reverberate so long and get stuck in that cycle or in that pattern for so long. It tends to just, oh, there it goes. And then I notice it calms down a bit more in that way. And I think that's why I want to emphasize what mindfulness is a bit more, because I hear some folks talk about like, well, surfing's my meditation or gardening's my meditation, and that may be. We might get into some flow state into those areas, but I'm not necessarily sure if we gain the wisdom that comes from self-awareness of being able to watch those things and get to know thyself. I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, no, it's a different quality. I mean, while everything can be mindfulness, there is a different quality to practicing still meditation. When you're skateboarding or you're surfing or you're playing tennis or you're painting, you're practicing mindfulness of that activity. And to some extent, the stimulus that you're taking in is the reason you love that thing as mindfulness, painting, surfing, whatever, is because it forces your mind to be present. Like you can't wander off because the ocean is coming at you and the light's so beautiful and that ride was so fun. But when you stop and still your body, your mind starts going all over the place. It's challenging yourself more to say, okay, let me really take a look at this TV show that is me, because I'm shutting my eyes and I'm just letting it run, and I'm not afraid to look at that. And it's challenging. I mean, it becomes very peaceful over years, or when you can go on retreat, it becomes extremely blissful at times, but there's the majority of the beginning of mindfulness, or even when you just first sit down and you're in your busy day, is like, well, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to watch this show. This show's crazy.
I'm working so hard to avoid this show. That's why I've got this phone. That's why I've got all these things to distract me from this show. I don't want to watch this show.
But you're right. I love that metaphor, because if you can see it as a show, then you're just like, this is the self that I've created. But the beautiful thing about mindfulness is that when you become aware that the story's just happening on its own, unchecked, then you can kind of start to be the writer of the story as well. Like a lot of people think of mindfulness as you're just kind of you're going back to zero, you're blanking out. But once you sort of learn the way the waves are moving or learn the narrative of the show, then you can kind of start driving that narrative too and say, well, no, I don't want to go down that story of like why I should be further along in my career right now or beat myself up. I want to go to the story of gratitude, or I want to go to the story of goal setting, or I want to go to the story of appreciation, or seeing myself in 10 years and doing a little visualization and feeling really great about that. Like that's a narrative you can bring into your mindfulness that isn't traditional mindfulness practice, but I'm just saying, like, it's like once you understand that the TV show is a creation, that you're not really involving yourself in that much because it's happening on its own, then you can start to direct that TV show to an extent. And I love what you said about accepting the fact that, like, oh, these emotions are happening, and that's okay. Like, I don't have to shoot a second arrow. And the surfing metaphor that I use with mindfulness is like all my thoughts and feelings and emotions and self-perceptions, those are the waves on the surface of the ocean. But my true self is the ocean. And the ocean's not phased even by a tsunami. That's like a flicker on the surface. So like my true strength and my true stability is the sea. So like nothing that I can think or feel can really phase that. And the thing I use in parenting is like, okay, the sea is the love that I feel for my children. Like that's unbreakable. So I might be having like a frustrated moment or a day where I'm like, how did I get into this mess? I don't have any time anymore. If I breathe, take a beat, and I can like still feel a thread to that love, that oceanic self, that's the trump card.
Mindfulness essentially gives us a way to break that unconscious fear-based or emotional reactivity and just say, oh, I'm doing that thing. This is what the pattern does. This is what the machinery does when I'm not at the wheel, when I'm unconscious. Being mindful says I can recognize it and say, well, I can just watch this show play out. It's reality TV at its finest. There's a lot of drama here. Or I can ask myself, what other choice would I want to make here? What's actually going to have me feel stronger, more free, more alive, more at peace? And so we can make those better choices there. And this we come back to like, oh, I would go play. I would go, I would connect in with this deeper sense of love in this moment instead of wanting to strangle these kids in my room or whatever.
Right.
Or like what I need to do is go take a break. I need to give myself some space here so I can react, so I can respond from a more powerful place. What I'm getting from this is that mindfulness is one of those things that we want to develop because left on our own, our minds are going to be reacting from a really primitive, fear-based place. You wrote about this in the Fear Project a lot, where how the studies show that we're still really in a primitive, really working with an old primitive brain, an old primitive organ. And mindfulness is a way for us to, I don't know, is it quickly evolve or to access some of our higher functioning there so that we don't always have to be kind of dragging our knuckles along?
Yeah, no, one of my teachers, Robert Thurman, would always say meditation is an evolutionary sport because you're right. We have this old biology. I mean, the limbic system, amygdala, is basically functioning the same way it does in, rats and even snakes, which, there were only a few things that you needed in that primitive time, which was like sex drive, fear, hunger. And it's like those three things can kind of keep a species going. But then we developed through social interaction and needing to strategize, the hunt and gather, all these language and storytelling and ritual. And that's all in the prefrontal cortex, which is slower than the limbic system, which has to be lightning fast, because if a rock's falling or, the saber-toothed tiger is about to jump out, you need to feel the adrenaline before you think, oh, what is that? Is that a saber-toothed tiger? Let me name it. Yeah. Yeah. What phylum and species is this? It's got to be lightning fast. So that strategy our brains are still using to get fear into our system. And so the fear is going to beat you, and that's okay. I mean, that's what I think mindfulness has been for me, is like accepting the fact that even after 20 years of meditation, I'm going to feel a jolt of fear. I'm going to get into some negative spins from time to time. And that's okay. That's just my body going through its process. But what fear is just energy in the body. So what that's doing is just sending a little extra circulation to your limbs to fight or flee. It's an espresso shot, essentially. It's really uncomfortable if that espresso shot spins you into a negative story about why this project's going to fail or why you're not good enough for XYZ. But if it's just like, oh, I'm feeling nervous and that's totally normal. I have a little extra energy right now. How do I want to direct this energy? Maybe you can't sleep. So you're like, I know I'm not going to be able to sleep for the next hour. I'll get up and meditate, or I'll get up and work a little bit or something. But not beat yourself up about it. It's just like, okay, I have some adrenaline in my body. I'll let it run its course and then I'll go back to sleep. It's like taking all the self-judgment out of the fact that this is our biology. We're saddled with it. It's cool. It works well, but it's not perfect. And once you understand that, you can kind of use it to your advantage.
Yeah. I appreciate that you essentially described those arrows there, right? It's like, okay, here's this shot of fear. There is this circumstance. There's this thing I need to deal with. And then I could attach meaning to that. And here comes all of the other arrows and all the, I should be this and I should be that. That's the stuff that creates all the suffering. And what I heard you say is like, well, I could be mindful here. How do I want to use this? This is reality. This is a given now. How do I want to respond? Which is different than, why is this happening? What's wrong? Like, who do I blame? And I'm to blame. And it was my parents to blame because I'm like this. Is like just getting into that cycle of suffering and watching. Now we're watching the TV show. There it goes, right? We've got a plot and we're going to see how this plays out. I remember when I got into meditation, I thought I was going to be able to escape that stuff. I was on the hook. I was like, yeah, this enlightenment stuff sounds awesome. Like I was under the impression that I'm going to be able to escape this fear this sense of vulnerability for good. And that was another trap that once I was practicing was like, why is this stuff still showing up that I was trying to escape? I was using this practice as an escape. So I want to just voice that here, because I can imagine as we're talking about this, somebody's like, hell yeah, I'm going to finally be able to escape my crazy monkey mind and my suffering. And I want to be clear that that's not what's going to happen. I love that you said that. This stuff still is going to happen. We're just going to have more facility and more choice and more power around it.
You see that a lot in meditation communities and stuff, or people who they're essentially feeding some sort of nihilistic urge that I just want things to go away. I don't want to just, and you even see like people using Buddhist philosophy as like, there's this idea of no self, that they're just like, well, I'm just going to disappear, and I'm meditating here so that I can disappear. and like bliss will be when I disappear, or when, and like, that's emphatically not the point. So I think enlightenment to some degree is the nature to which you really start letting go of this fixed self, the TV show, living the TV show guy, and feeling trapped in that. Like it's like the Truman Show, you know, it's like you break out of that and you're like, oh, here's life. It's full color. And I actually feel connected with other people. And I'm not just in this narcissistic reality that's so painful, really. It's like, that's that voice that you were talking about earlier, where it's like, but if I stop living in fear, it'll all unravel. You know, and
start to experience the good stuff today instead of once everything's complete and once everything's perfect or safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny, going back to the kids' book, Mop, there's this picture in there that you might have seen where Mop, the surfer kid, he's duck diving this triple up of fear and sadness and anger. And he's realizing that he can breathe through his emotions, or he can let them pass, because they don't last forever, just like we duck dive waves. My kids colored that in the coloring book, and I started hanging them up around the wall, around the house. And then I realized it was this great tool where, like, if they're fighting or we're flipping out, I'd be like, hey, you're in a wave, take a break. And it was funny, our 8-year-old's very cognitive, like cerebral kid, and he was so angry at his brother. And I was like, hey, you're in a wave, take a breath. And he was like, no, I'm going to feel this way forever. I'm so mad. And he heard himself saying, and his logic kicked in, and he was like, he smiled. I was like, you're going to feel that way forever? But it's funny, like, to see that in kids, because that's the story that, like, our emotions tell us when we're really locked in fear or like anger, or when we're really locked in one of those second arrows. Especially the deep entrenched ones, we're like, no, this is how it is. This is the way it's going to be. I'm finally seeing it right. And life sucks, or whatever. It's you know, or I'm a failure, and now I'm really seeing it. And if you can sort of almost like, it's neat to see kids do it, because it's like a caricature. But if you imagine like your future self or your parent being like, look, the things you're freaking out about right now are not that big of a deal. And let me tell you, 20 years from now, you're going to look back and want to say to yourself now, don't sweat that stuff right now. Like, it all works out. Like, get involved, like, enjoy the time with your kids, enjoy that, you know, that surf or that run. Like, they get to hear that from us, but we don't really have a parent anymore saying that, like, hey, you're not going to be in that forever, buddy. And so that's a fun thing I've been playing with lately, is sort of like talking to my future self a little bit, as if like I do to my kids, being like, it's all good, man. Like,
this is happening. This is reality, and it won't always be this way. I think that's the feeling. It's one of the reasons why we have a hard time, like why some folks will have a hard time meditating at first, which is, I don't want to feel this stuff. I'm afraid I'm going to feel this way forever, right? If I actually start to feel this stuff, I'm going to feel uncomfortable forever, which is different than recognizing here's a wave. I might be sad for a little bit. I might feel my anger for a little bit. I might feel this discomfort for a little bit. And understanding that if we're willing to have those feelings, we're willing to go through those waves, then we can stop having to feel like we're always on the run, trying to outrun ourselves, trying to always distract ourselves. That's the exhausting part. And it opens the door to a lot of the stuff of what you and I have been talking about today, which is I can come back and just enjoy my life as it is today. I don't always have to be on the run.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, it's funny, like you're right. We want to avoid those waves. And this was a misconception I had of meditation, just like you. I think I had a little bit of like a macho approach where I was like, all right, I'm gonna, I'm gonna bust these emotions up. Like I'm gonna get Zen and have a peaceful mind. And there's a metaphor in, in Zen Buddhism where you have your Vajra sword and you're like cutting through illusion. I was like, yeah, I don't have to feel this stuff because I'm a badass meditator now and I've done this intense retreat.
Right.
And the truth was, when I really went on a retreat with the mindset of letting emotions be, like letting my mind be rather than trying to use meditation as like almost like this like micromanagement sword or something. A huge flood of like old stuff came up. My parents' divorce. I ended up sobbing through a good portion of the retreat. But what I realized was like feeling those emotions was like heavenly after they'd been bottled up for so long. Because sadness, like when you're actually feeling it, is actually not an unpleasant sensation. When you really are letting an emotion come through that's been bottled up, it's like a great stretch. You're like, oh, I'm letting that out. So I think to people who are, when they do sit down and say, oh, I don't like this show's a little scary. It's like, I would just say, just wait, because like not all those waves that seem like they are negative or have negative labels are necessarily bad ones to feel.
It's also that we might be more uncomfortable with the fear of that emotion rather than the emotion itself. Oh no, I'm going to feel, here comes the sadness, or here comes the anger, or here comes whatever. Yeah. Like, oh no, which is different than actually feeling that sadness or that anger or whatever has been, stuffed down there. I remember on one retreat where I think it was like day 4 and I was sitting there and if somebody had I was just fuming. I was just in this rage as I was sitting there, and I burned through like for an hour, just like, and then it opened up, and I remember I felt like I was just a ball of light. Like it just something shifted in my neurology, just everything just started to like melt, and I just went through it. It burned through from that rage and anger into this deep sadness, but then it just opened up. And what I took away from that was the ease and the peace that I'm seeking is usually on the other side of that thing that I'm unwilling to feel. And to this day, I still kick and scream and will not go into these places that I want to feel. Luckily, I have people in my corner, especially my wife, that's like, it's okay to feel this stuff, but I really want to find ways to not have to feel it. But I'm always reminded that when I feel it, that it's like, oh, there we go. Now I'm back to being me again. I get to be all of myself instead of trying to outrun those parts of me that I can't be with.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, that's such a good point, because it's going to come out. The feelings are going to come out some way.
Yeah.
But if you're living asleep, they come out in some way that you don't want. It's the difference between getting angry and raging around the house and saying to your wife, I'm really angry right now, and this is why I'm feeling this, and not like saying like, it's because of you.
Or being aggressive, right? There's anger. And then there's this like, you're this terrible person. You always do this. Like then we want to wound that person. There's a lot different than just like, I'm really freaking angry right now.
Yeah. And that's a kind of mindfulness too. Because basically when you can say that, I'm really angry right now, you've already taken that mindful step back and been like, the anger is not running me. I'm aware of it. I'm acknowledging it, and talking about it will help. Maybe there's some just reason that you feel angry. Maybe you've been wronged or something, but like sometimes you got to talk about it or write about it. And that can be equally valuable, I think, to sitting still. I've found recently, because I have less time to practice still meditation, that if I'm feeling real worked up about something that happened in the day and I'm going to maybe do a little mindfulness before I go to bed, I'll first do like a 5-minute little free write I do this thing where I kind of like write a letter to myself. Like I'll ask a question of sort of my, whatever you want to call it, like my higher self. And then I'll just let the pen start moving without thinking, trying to let whatever needs to come through, come through. And I usually find that I have an answer to my own question in that space. It's really helpful. I'll do that for maybe just a couple minutes and then sit. There's often just emotions need to be acknowledged. And then I find that I'm putting the wave in the context of the sea. Hey, ocean, let me throw you this wave. And the ocean's always the same. The ocean's always like, it's not that big of a deal, man. Like you're stronger than this. You can handle this. But something about maybe that's why I'm a writer. Something about writing it down I find really helpful, and absolutely just like an extension of still meditation. Sometimes that's bouncing it off a friend if you have it. I don't know if you need that kind of like sort of verbalization of mindfulness.
I think there's things where in the past I would try to address it individually. Like, okay, I'm feeling this thing. I'm going to go sit. And a lot of times it just stew in it. Like it was just like, oh, just right there in my face. And I would, get 20, 30 minutes of this thing right in my face and maybe not necessarily move, but I go talk to somebody and just say, hey, here's what's going on. And they would just listen to me and vomit for even 5 minutes. And it was like, oh, like you said, just needed to be acknowledged. I didn't even need to emote anything, but just like get it out there. So there's going from the I to the we that could really move that energy and get it out. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, like if I were to sit now, I could really have a much more, I think it would be a much different experience. So I think with experience, what you're talking about is we start to learn like, oh, this is one of those things that might be good to just go talk to a friend about and just have that person listen. And I just want to get this out. I'm going to vomit it. I'm not going to be attached to anything I say in the next few minutes. It just needs to come out. Like you said, just write and to get it out. Or that could be a thing where you write individually. But I definitely can appreciate that there's a difference to some of these ways that we just acknowledge this stuff, get it out. It moves like a wave. That's where the wave can then move. And then we come out the other side and we have more access to our cognitive abilities and our creative abilities.
I think you said it. So a lot of times the emotion just needs to be acknowledged. It just needs to be recognized. And to some extent, that's what you're doing in silence, where when something comes up, you're like, oh, fear, oh, sadness. But yeah, we're also verbal beings. And I think as guys, especially, like we really have this like age old story that we're not supposed to have to do that.
Somehow
like,
it's beneath us. We shouldn't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, again, just having lived this, like the sort of Zen approach where you're sort of like, you can even turn meditation into that, where you're like, I'm just going to man up and sit through this. Right. But like, hey, if that's not working yet, it's like, call up a friend, there's no one right way.
Yeah.
And to ride the wave.
Yeah. And I think it's about coming back. It's like, do I know to be stronger or not? Because I've spent years trying to outrun my emotions and it made me weaker. Like I wasn't getting tougher. I wasn't more resilient. I was becoming more and more fragile as a result. So it's like, do I want to get stronger or not? I do all these other things in my life to be stronger, whether it's financially or to have a stronger family or to have a stronger house or whatever. I'm always looking for those things. Like, well, why would I sandbag myself this way when it comes to, my creative power, my emotional power? And so it's like, yeah, well, I just want to get out of my way. What does it mean to get out of the way? Well, maybe it's the right thing to go talk to somebody right now and just do it. Get over yourself.
Yeah.
Go do it. This is the things I tell myself. And boy, I'm so glad I do it when I actually initiate it and do it. It's always, I've never been sorry for doing it. Put it that way.
Yeah. We often feel like we have to bottle that up. We often see this like sort of don't apologize figure, don't have any emotion figure as like the one who's going to get respect. Oftentimes just acknowledging that you're human, it can be such a great leadership tool as well, because it allows for that human connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, you're like me. Okay. And you're still leading and you're still getting things done and you're able to have, be more creative or whatever that thing is. I think that's the new archetype that we're all seeing develop as part of our generation here even more. So, Well, I'm glad you're doing this work. I love that you put out a children's book and you're trying to start to plant some of these seeds in the younger generation. It's exciting to me to see that be your next chapter here. Thank you so much, man. It was good to reconnect as well. I appreciate you helping me. I appreciated being able to reach out to you from time to time as I was going through my book process too. So thanks for the support.
No, it's just always such a pleasure to talk with you, Tripp. And I really appreciate what you do.
Be sure to check out Jaimal Yogis' new book for kids called Mop Rides the Waves of Life. It's available on Amazon. It's at your favorite bookstore, or you can check it out at your local library. If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.